Mr. Shahril Taha. I can move on to the next question, not ask you.
Okay, question, I think it was 27 then?
28.
28, question 28.
Mr. Speaker, with your permission, I'd like to take questions 28 to 41 together, as well as another related PQ by member Ip Hon Wing, scheduled for a sitting from tomorrow.
Please do.
I thank members for their interest in the recent recommendations of the Tripartite Work Group on low-wage workers, which the government has accepted. Apart from my reply today, I'd also like to encourage them to read the 88-page report of the work group, where the reasoning and intent of many of the proposals are laid out in greater detail. The work group's vision is for a strengthened social compact where everyone enjoys Singapore's fruits of growth. We want to enable our low-wage workers to progress along with other workers. At the same time, society, employers, and the government stand in solidarity with them. We must also recognize that for our low-wage workers' progress to be sustainable, Singapore must maintain a dynamic economy where businesses can thrive and create good jobs and good careers for our workers. Uplifting low-wage workers has been a priority for the government over the years. Workfare is the foundation of the government's support of our low-wage workers. And we currently spend about $850 million a year on workfare. Prime Minister has announced that workfare spending is expected to increase to $1.1 billion by 2023. Now, this is a clear commitment that workfare will continue to be a foundation of our policy response. The government will release more details next year. Mr. Speaker, building on the foundation of workfare, the Progressive Wage Model, or PWM, provides job and training progression pathways for our low-wage workers and grows their wages as they improve their skills and their productivity. Workfare and progressive wages work in tandem and are therefore mutually reinforcing. Over the last decade, our policies to support lower-wage workers have made a difference in uplifting them to enjoy good wage growth. From 2009 to 2019, real incomes at the 20th percentile of our resident workforce grew 39% cumulatively, faster than the median worker at 33%. So to address Ms. Ng Ling Ling's and Mr. Desmond Chu's questions, I want to stress that these are real income gains. In other words, 39% cumulative income gains even after subtracting the effects of inflation. So low-income households would therefore benefit from our progressive wage and workfare policies. I'm sure many members are aware that there are dedicated efforts to support our lower-income households through various schemes such as subsidies in education, in healthcare, housing, as well as financial assistance. Households facing financial difficulties can approach MSF social service officers, which will look into ways to support them through schemes such as ComCare assistance. MSF regularly reviews ComCare to ensure that support remains adequate. The work group achieved tripartite consensus on 18 recommendations, including significantly widening the coverage of progressive wages. First, we will expand progressive wages to new sectors like food services, retail, and waste management, as well as occupations like administrators and drivers. And we will also extend PWMs to in-house cleaners, security officers, as well as landscape workers. Second, we will introduce a new local qualifying salary or LQS requirement, where employers will need to pay all its local workers at least the LQS in order to access any foreign worker. Third, we will introduce the progressive wage mark or PW mark to encourage firms that pay progressive wages. Now, the work group has not deviated from the broad principle that wages should grow in tandem with productivity over the long term so as to be sustainable. However, it was recognized that there was a case of wage growth, the case for wage growth of low-wage workers to outpace productivity. And this is because productivity of frontline workers is not due solely to the industriousness of the worker, but it is also dependent on the firm's operations and methods of work. So the work group also recommended that for the next decade, the wages of our low-wage workers should continue to grow faster than median, or what we call the median plus approach. However, when wages at the 20th percentile have gained sufficiently on median wage levels, this would no longer be necessary. We can reflect on other strategies beyond that. Mr. Edward Chia and Mr. Shahril Taha asked about the sustainability of these wage increases. I mean, these are very important questions. And one important way we will do this is to continue the progressive wage approach, whereby wage increases are secured by tripartite consensus, and that is the agreement between the employers and the unions remain very important. Now, these will be done by sectoral tripartite clusters for the sectoral progressive wages and the National Wage Council for the occupational progressive wages. I know for a fact, and especially during these times, that tripartite negotiations are never easy, and for good reason, as the concerns of the different parties, of the employers, of the workers, need to be balanced. Tripartism is our strength, and some say our secret sauce to make progressive wages work for the foreseeable future. And I'm confident that through such robust discussions, these established tripartite bodies will arrive at a common ground that is sustainable and that benefits all stakeholders. If wage growth of our low-wage workers outpace productivity growth in the medium term, the sustainable response is for businesses to use this period to urgently enhance their firm-level productivity to better support wage increases for our workers. To Mr. Shahril Taha's query, the government will continue to support firms through the Productivity Solutions Grant, as well as more specific efforts enabled by the industry transformation maps. So for many years, firms hiring foreign workers have been required to pay at least the LQS to the local workers that they need to count towards their foreign worker quota or the dependency ratio ceiling or DRC. So this is a policy that our businesses are already familiar with. The work group studied this carefully and decided to leverage on the LQS to broaden our coverage of progressive wages. So from September next year, firms hiring foreign workers will have to pay all local workers the LQS. Now, this builds upon regular increases in the LQS levels over the years, such as from $1,000 in 2016 to $1,400 in 2020. To Ms. Herting Ru's query, there are 103,000 full-time resident employees earning a gross monthly income of below $1,400 in 2020, which is about 5.3% of the full-time employed resident workforce. But I also like to take the opportunity to highlight that in 2020, many of our low-wage workers were also impacted by the economic impact of COVID-19 and faced reduced work hours and reduced allowances. So these employees work in a wide range of industries, from food services to administrative and support services, and occupy a diverse range of jobs, from cleaners to office clerks to shop sale assistants. And we can imagine the impact of COVID-19 on these jobs in the last year plus. And this was also why the government provided special support of $3,000 to this segment of workers through the Workfare Special Payment and other social support schemes. With the new LQS requirement, an estimated 77% of these employers should see their wages rise to at least $1,400 a month. Many in this group would also see their wages further uplifted beyond LQS by the sectoral and occupational progressive wage. So the work group expects the PWMs to continue to set the pace on wage growth, with progressive wages levels expected to rise beyond the LQS. So for example, workers in the cleaning and landscape sectors can potentially earn at least about $2,400 a month by 2028. To Ms. Hazelpoa's query, the remaining 23% who are not covered would be in businesses that do not hire foreign workers. So the vast majority of these businesses are very small, hiring fewer than 10 workers, and include small family operations such as hawker stalls and heartland shops. And we are all familiar with these micro businesses. They are familiar faces in our neighborhoods and typically having family members who are spouse, who are children or relatives helping out. They don't have the business scale or reach, and we are mindful that sudden wage shifts to these micro businesses can result in business failure. So the last thing you want is for job losses for these family businesses. But while not formally covered by the LQS requirement, these workers here should still see meaningful increases in their wages over time due to market forces. So the progressive wages will cover 8 in 10 full-time low-wage workers, and the PW mark is expected to bring the coverage of progressive wages up to 94% of full-time low-wage workers. So at 94%, or 8 in 10, and moving up to 94%, I think I'm quite confident that market forces will probably lift the remainder up over time. Some members, including Mr. Yip Hon Wing, asked about how the LQS is currently being determined and under what circumstances will it be reviewed. As the work group report explains, the LQS is a stable benchmark that has been in place for many years, and it has been revised 4 times in the last 5 years. So we recognize that the new LQS requirement in 2022 will have a significant impact on employers. So we are also mindful and sensitive to the fact that many of our companies are still recovering from the effects of COVID-19 on our economy. Hence, we have no plans to further increase the LQS for now, but we'll focus on the implementation of the new LQS rules, and also for the other sectoral and occupational progressive wages to establish the relevant wage benchmarks. So I urge members not to look at each measure in isolation, but to bear in mind the overall and holistic impact on not just the workers, but also the employers. So members have also asked about the implementation details. I'd like to give the assurance that the intent of MOMs is for firms to be well informed on the moves and to have adequate time to adjust before the implementation. So to Mr. Edward Chia's query, firms that hire foreign workers are already familiar with the concept of LQS for many years. Now, together with tripartite partners, the government will continue to outreach to firms before the new LQS requirement and other new progressive wages kick in on 1st September 2022. So the initial period beyond its introduction will be a run-in period for which MOM will focus on educating employers on the various progressive wage and LQS requirements that they need to adhere to. In other words, I can assure employers that MOM will not jump straight into strict enforcement, but it will initially focus on improving awareness and compliance because we are all moving towards a new system. And this is the same approach that was adopted when the New Employment Act obligations were introduced in 2016. In designing the system to support the new moves, we will make the compliance process as smooth as possible. To Ms. Rachel Ong's query, we will keep additional reporting requirements minimal by tapping on existing processes such as CPF salary declarations and returns to MOM's business census. Employers will also be able to refer to MOM's website to check the job descriptions of workers eligible for progressive wages and the required wages. We will also explore ways to allow employees to check that they are paid the progressive wages due to them. So employees also have a chance to get used to the new system. So we note that the Singapore Business Federation has acknowledged that the report of the work group has taken into consideration their feedback on minimizing the burden of compliance for firms. So to Mr. Liang Inghua's query on how the PW mark will be administered, we will tap on the same systems that I've just described to ensure that only firms that pay progressive wages are awarded the PW mark. Now, this will assure companies and consumers that when they purchase from firms with the PW mark, they're directly supporting lower wage workers in those firms. Now, the public sector will take the lead and require its suppliers to obtain the mark. As the support of private sector buyers is also essential, the tripartite partners will also work with the various trade associations and chambers to raise awareness of the PW mark, promote its adoption, and encourage businesses to purchase from other businesses with the PW mark. Mr. Speaker, sir, uplifting low-wage workers is a whole of society responsibility, and the cost of raising their wages have to be shared. And so workers will have to adopt the right mindset and be ready to adapt and learn new skills to be more productive. And employers will need to increase productivity at the firm level, which would help them better absorb the additional wage costs. The government will do its part too with respect to employers, and the government recognizes that the employers will need some time to adjust their operations, especially as the economy is still recovering from COVID-19. As such, to the queries of Ms. Jessica Tan and other members, the government has accepted the recommendation from the work group to provide transition support and is carefully studying the details of that support. Now, this will be announced in due course, and certainly I want to provide the assurance that this will come before the implementation of the first moves in September 2022. With respect to the workers, I've already touched on the government's commitment to expanding workfare. So to Ms. Rachel Ong's question on whether there will be a shift away from workfare to employers paying for the wages of our low-wage workers, the answer is no. The government is committed to workfare as a permanent scheme. At the same time, employers do their part by offering progressive wages. Ms. Rachel Ong asked why we are lowering the workfare qualifying age to 30 years old and whether we will lower it further below the age of 30. Below the age of 30, most workers would have just started work and earning starting salaries. Most will have greater potential for future income growth. Therefore, it will be too premature to consider them for workfare. They could be better supported through training and upskilling efforts such as Skills Future to help them access better jobs and grow their wages in a sustainable way. For workers aged 30 to 34, however, some continue to remain in the low-wage range despite the upskilling efforts. At this age, they are just starting their own families or looking to buy their first home. We believe that workfare will help them better cope with their current expenses and to start saving for retirement. Ms. Cheng Li Hui and other members asked if businesses will unfairly raise prices. I can certainly understand why this is a big concern for many of us. In the food services and retail sectors where there are many firms competing and barriers to entry are not high, firms will be expected to think carefully about cost increases. It is also fair to say that we have to expect some degree of cost increase to accommodate higher salaries for our low-wage workers. And this is where we, as consumers, have got to do our part in support of our low-wage workers. And I therefore hope that Singaporeans will not accuse firms unfairly of profiteering, but let's also work together to address any unreasonable price increases or any unreasonable practices. One reason the work group recommended that the National Wage Council help to provide guidance on wage growth is to enable the tripartite partners to carefully weigh the impact of wage growth, inflation, and general economic conditions every year before finalizing their guidance. Because the growth of progressive wage is negotiated through tripartite consensus, rest assured we have more assurance that wage increases will be sustainable for workers, employers, as well as consumers. Mr. Speaker, sir, the effort to uplift our low-wage workers is a massive undertaking, spanning the next decade and beyond. To do this well, we will need to go beyond a whole-of-government approach or even a whole-of-tripartite sector approach. We will need the whole of society, workers, consumers, employers, union, the government, members of the public, to come behind and support this effort. The government has committed to providing transitional support and increasing work increasing spending on workfare. Tripartite partners have agreed on a roadmap to chart the progress of our low-wage workers over the next decade. And many businesses and consumers already recognize that they will need to do their part by paying a little more for goods and services. There's been a heartening support from society at large since Prime Minister spoke at the National Day rally. I also like to thank our tripartite partners for helping chart this roadmap ahead. So let us continue on this course to bring society together behind the goal of supporting our low-wage workers. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
Ms. Jessica Tan.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Thank you, SMS, for your comprehensive reply. I have one supplementary question. I understand the need for LQS and the intent to uplift the wages of lower-wage workers, and SMS did talk about the need for that to PWM to complement that. I am concerned, however, that, and I'm asking SMS, how do we ensure that LQS does not become the maximum wage for lower-wage workers in companies that hire foreign workers?
I thank the member for her question. So in fact, as I shared earlier, the main driver of wage growth in the next decade or so will really be your PWMs. And how we've seen, I think it's been heartening to see how employers have come on board, despite the last 1 year being a challenging year with COVID-19. And as you look at the PWMs that were renewed, for the next for the next 6-8 years, you see the cleaning sector, the landscape sector, how employers have supported us through this and grown the wage ladders at a pace that's faster than median, what we call the median plus approach. You look at the end state in 2028, where cleaning and landscape will end up at $2,400 per month, and moving on to say lift and escalator PWMs too, going up to $3,000 a month. I think these are ways in which we support, and this will drive market forces too. So speaking to employers, I know some also concerned, that if the cleaner, for example, earns $2,400 a month in 2028, then the rest of the firm will also, seek to ask, why not the tea lady to asking why I'm not earning the same as the cleaner, for example, administrators, for example, doing so. So these are areas in which I think, will be game changers in the years ahead. But at the same time, the concern of some parts of society is that whether this will also increase costs for businesses. So that's also the other part where we will see how to balance this. On LQS, this is a measure that's, I said, most employers are really quite familiar with. Most workers today in which, who are in firms hiring foreign workers are already paid beyond LQS. You're down to the last 5% of workers. And actually would have been much less, but the numbers was because of last year, and we're down with COVID-19 pandemic, so we've seen many of them having income drops. And this is where we think in the long term, this PWM will help them over time and in a sustainable manner, because the employers are all on board with us on this. So look forward to some of the upcoming PWMs. Food services, retail, waste management will come on next year. The tripartite clusters are negotiating the wage benchmarks, and will come up to share what these new benchmarks will be. Occupational sectoral wage, occupational progressive wage, across sectors for administrators as well as the drivers are also key to us, and something that we are now still negotiating, and we'll come up with the benchmark soon too. So looking at all these wage benchmarks and wage ladders ahead, I'm quite confident that we can, the PWMs will continue to drive wage growth, but at the same time, it's important that we assure employers that these moves are sustainable, and I'm glad that most are on board, and supporting us on this, despite the challenging times today.
Ms. Hazel Phua.
I thank the SMS for his reply, but I'd like to point out that I listened to his reply, but I still did not get the answer to my question, which was how many Singaporeans earning less than 1,004 would not be covered by this scheme. And on top of that, I have two supplementary questions. Firstly, would employers who wish to employ foreigners no longer be able to employ part-timers at under $1,400? Would this spell the end of part-time employment? Last question. The SMS mentioned that over the year 2009 to 2019, the real wage growth of the lowest quintile outperformed those of the highest. Now, if we look at only wage growth, it does not include other income like investment income, rental income. So this does not quite give us the full picture of how inequality is changing. Thus, the Ministry of Manpower tracks similar data, but in terms of total income.
I thank Ms. Hazelpa for her query. So in fact, in response, I did share that 23% of the remainder would be in businesses that do not hire foreign workers. So it's a minority left, 23%. Out of your 103,000 full-time employees, so it's about 20%, 20,000 or so, thereabouts. And as I shared, with progressive wages, you will end up hopefully covering up to 94% of all our low-wage workers. So you will, see a long-term impact on terms of how their wages will grow over time. And also bear in mind that the remainder that is left are typically those in micro businesses. Like I shared, in heartland shops, people you're very familiar with. And the last thing you want is to have them collapse in the short term because they don't have scale. And many of them, uncles and aunties running stalls, and I'm not even sure whether the uncle pays the auntie full wages too, but these are areas in which I think we have to correct over time, but you don't want to collapse them in the short term. So this is something we are very mindful, not to disrupt the whole system in such a way. On your second question on, sorry, what was the second? Can you repeat the second question again? Part-timers, yes. So on the part-timers, if you look at the LQS mechanism today, we do have a rate for part-timers, which is $9 per hour. And that also gives you a half a count for a DRC. If you employ at least half of that rate, means $700 an hour for part-timers. So this is one way in which we still maintain the current system, but at the same time provide some flexibility for part-time workers, for many of our employees. So that one, employees don't have to worry too much because they're familiar with the system and the part-time mechanism still continues. It's just that we now set a $9 rate per hour for part-time workers.
Edward Chia.
Thanks, Speaker. I'd like to ask the SMS two supplementary questions. Regards to firms' level productivity, are there actually specific plans to ensure that firm level productivity support dovetail with workers' upskilling and not as two separate activities? And the second supplementary question is regards to LQS. Can the ministry consider a predictable timeline for future adjustments so that employers can make reasonable financial projections, especially when they are pricing entering or pricing in fixed price term tenders? Thank you.
So I thank Mr. Chia for his question. Two things. One, I think, let me just start with the LQS one first. I think I've shared earlier that really the government's approach is that we will start with outreaching to firms and getting them familiar with this new LQS requirement. I think it's important, that with this change, I think it affects many of our businesses, that we give them time to run in, and rest assured that while the LQS requirement may have kicked in, we are going to work on advising and seeing how we can get companies to comply rather than enforcing right in front. So that's also why we've also given the announcement and heads up now, so that firms will be ready by 1st September next year to implement this new LQS approach. So it will be a light touch up front, but I'm quite sure firms are already quite familiar with this LQS mechanism, and that's why this was an ideal framework to leverage on, because it's not something new that firms have not complied to in the past. It's just that the framework has been modified and tweaked. On your second question on firm level productivity and workers' productivity, that's a very good question, because to some extent the narrative going with many of our firms today and the approach so far with PWM has been the workers have to upskill and they have to improve productivity, and therefore they have to justify productivity gains against wage gains. But I think moving forward we also have to think about productivity gains very differently too. So there is the worker level productivity as you train and upskill him. But there is also that level of productivity leap that you can get when firms make the effort to transform, do job redesigns. And if I give you an example, like the security sector, for example, I mean the Jaga, when you think of security guard, in the old days you think of a Jaga at the gate. If you just train him that way and you just make him more productive, there's only so much productivity you can gain as a Jaga at the gate. But I have to commend the security sector that through PWM, and working with the unions and the sector, I'm quite heartened to see today they're using CCTVs, technologies, and you see suddenly the firm level productivity jumps. And therefore, you look at the wage levels of our security officers have also jumped in the last 5 years. And therefore, that justifies productivity, not just at the worker level, but because businesses, also push on with the transformation. I think, if you look at many other sectors, including cleaning and landscape, we are seeing them making those changes, making efforts towards job redesign, transformation. And that is also why firms were agreeable to this, wage increases that we've seen, or we've seen in terms of the wage ladders in the years ahead, because they have also bear in mind how contracts will be in the near future and how we are moving towards outcome-based contracting. And these are ways in which they can offer more, use better technologies, look at how we can redesign jobs to make them more attractive. And certainly, we've seen entry rates of locals into these jobs increase. I think many of us have also seen appeals at MTS, where there are more locals today asking for security licenses because they know that the wages are much better today and therefore worth considering. So this is one way in which, when you look at productivity gains, in terms of wages, it should not just be on the basis of the worker level productivity, but this is where government continues to support through our Productivity Solutions Grant and Industry Transformation Maps to make sure that our companies are able to transform and redesign the jobs to be more productive and pay our workers better salaries and give them better careers too.
Mr. Gerald Giam.
Madam, I have one supplementary question. The LQS was not meant to be a minimum wage quantum. It exists to ensure firms don't hire phantom local workers to meet their DRC for the purpose of hiring foreign workers. So it is merely a coincidence that the LQS of 1,400 is similar to the average household expenditure on basic needs, AHEBN, for the bottom 20% of income earners. As such, would it not be better to peg the minimum wage to the AHEBN instead of the LQS? This will allow the minimum wage to rise in tandem with cost increases so that the low-wage workers will not lose out over time. Thank you.
Well, to answer the member's question, no, it was not by coincidence, or maybe it's by coincidence that the numbers are looking the same. But as I shared, we've adjusted it 4 times out of 5 in the last 5 years. Sorry, we adjusted it 4 times in the last 5 years, from 1,000, in the year 2016 to 1,400 in 2020. So maybe it's by coincidence or not, but it's been adjusted because we've got various wage benchmarks that we work on. But the main goal of the LQS was also to ensure that your Singaporeans' wages were not depressed as they hired foreign workers. So therefore, as you hired foreign workers using a Singaporean for the quota, you didn't want the Singaporean worker to be left out and be depressed because you typically would have access to cheaper foreign labor out there. So of course, we have other obligations made on the employer, such as taking care of the worker, giving him food if he's in dormitory and so forth, and medical expenses. But overall, I think net the objective was not to have Singaporeans lose out as firms access foreign workers. So unlike minimum wage laws around the world. There's an International Labour Convention where you cannot have laws that discriminate between locals and foreign. So therefore, most legislations around the world, you find minimum wages covering both local and foreign workers. So this enables us to make the differentiation, but the overall concept still applies, whereby, as you hire foreign workers in your firm, you want to ensure that not just those that are being counted have a fair wage, but every Singaporean worker in your firm has a fair wage too. So I think on balance, it is maybe perhaps coincidental, but the wage levels for the LQS have been adjusted over time to ensure that we meet certain benchmarks that we manage, and it's been a fair one. But we also have to manage over time, and that's why we also take guidance, for our progressive wages from the National Wage Council moving forward as well, largely because we want to make sure that it's sustainable and not open to political auction. So the last thing you want is to have a political auction on what the wage level should be, but let's pick a fair one that a committee looks at available data, projections, and see what's sustainable, and the impact to inflation, because that too, I think, is a concern for many Singaporeans on cost of living impacts as well over time. So these are quite complex matters in which we need to give assurance, not just to the workers, but to the employers and the consumers at large too, to create a fair system. At the same time as well, as I shared, it also gives us a release valve for many of our micro businesses who are not covered by the LQS because they are typically your heartland shops, and many of these micro businesses with less than 10 workers. Thank you.
Mr. Yip Hon Wing.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. I thank the SMS for his response. I have one SQ. How will the ministry help companies that are locked into forward contracts with their customers, like those in the construction sector, to bear the additional cost of the LQS requirement? Thank you.
So I thank the member for the question. The short answer is that, as I shared, the government is studying the transition support that we will provide employers for wage increases, in the next few years. One, we understand there will be some firms who are locked into contracts. Secondly, you are also we are also recovering from the COVID-19 pandemic, and therefore firms do need time to recover. And certainly the transition support will hopefully help them in the short term as we balance the needs of our low-wage workers as well as the businesses who need to recover and still cover these additional salaries. But overall, that's why it's also important for our PWMs to be negotiated with our employers. And a lot of times you look at our PWMs, we announce them years in advance. So for cleaning and security, on landscape, for example, these are also contracts that run 3 to 5 years ahead. And therefore, we announce it today for a new PWM ladder that starts in 2023, for example. So this is one way in which we help firms prepare, and we give them advance notice. And therefore, the sector also understands this, that we typically give them advance headway to do this. And for the short term, as I said, look out for our announcements on the transition support before the new LQS requirements and PWMs kick in next year. Thank you.